Religious faith continues to profoundly shape the culture we live in. Knowing the basics about religious practices past and present is essential if you want to understand the values and norms of our society. Comparative religion is rarely taught in schools. Most students know very little about the history of religion or about the practices found in the world's major religions. Yet, religious faith in God are commonly referenced in our society. We live in a country that professes separation of government and religion, yet many politicians use references to God to justify their actions. The importance of spirituality, religion, and faith are immediately evident looking at art produced over thousands of years. The evidence can be seen in Paleolithic cave paintings, in the tombs of Egyptian pharaohs, in the sculpture of ancient Greece, Rome, and India. Throughout history, religious faith has been the most prevalent topic for art over thousands of years. Only recently have other topics attained some prominence in art. In this module, I'll focus on how religion came to so heavily influence art and culture. But first, let's look at an overview of religious faiths today. As you can see, 70% of Americans identify as Christian. The next largest group are people who don't affiliate with any religion. About a quarter of the people, 23% of Americans, say they don't identify with any particular religious tradition, or in fact that they are atheists. People who identify with other religions only comprise 6% of the American population. 2% of Americans are Jewish, and about 1% are Muslim. Smaller numbers identify as Buddhist or Hindu. Looking at world population, the picture is quite different. 31% identify as Christian, 23% as Muslim, 16% unaffiliated, 15% Hindu, 7% Buddhist, and 6% who identify with a variety of folk religions. 0.2% are Jewish. It's useful to have a sense of how many adherents there are to various faiths, but what's really important, if one's goal is to understand our culture, is to look at which religions have had the greatest impact on history, and which of these religions are active agents in our society today, regardless of your own identity. For that reason, we're going to focus on Western religions, the ones that have most shaped this society. That means, and named in chronological order, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These three faiths that are sometimes called the Western monotheistic religions and also referred to as Abrahamic faiths. This because all three consider Abraham to be a significant person or prophet. But before talking about these Abrahamic faiths that influence virtually all aspects of our culture, I want to talk about where religion comes from. About 100,000 years ago, the brains of early Homo sapiens developed a capacity for introspection. These people became capable of thinking about themselves. Much later, beginning about 40,000 years ago, modern Homo sapiens began to develop what's called autobiographical memory, the ability to visualize the past and the future in personal terms. This new stage of cognitive development meant that existential questions like, where did I come from? And what will happen to me when I die? These questions began to be common. At this same time, life began to change from a transient hunter-gatherer existence to a very different, more fixed agrarian way of life. For the first time, large groups of people lived in one place, generation after generation. This led to an increased focus on the deceased ancestors and the development of rituals involving burial. Veneration of ancestors and the creation of rituals that would honor their spirits became common during this time, when agricultural practices and language became more sophisticated. And we know from evidence uncovered and examined by archaeologists, anthropologists, and other scientists that as far back as we can trace human activity, people were in awe of phenomena beyond their comprehension. All that was animate, all that is alive, became a source of wonder and often the object of worship. The practice of religion has always had a lot to do with the need for people to be able to control forces beyond control. People venerate the things or people they are most dependent upon. Numerous fertility figurines, little statuettes over a vast period of time call attention to the mysterious ways that women suddenly changed their physical form, gave birth to infants, and nursed them with milk. Animals on which people also depended on as a protein source. They used their bones to make tools, their clothing and shelter from skins. All of this was of critical importance. Almost every animal has been worshipped in one culture or another. Similarly, forces we call climate or weather were addressed with prayers and invocations and came to be embodied as gods and goddesses in many cultures. As people began to live in larger communities, hierarchies of social and political power became defined. Gradually, the most powerful, the kings and other rulers, came themselves to be considered gods. What we would recognize as distinct religions first developed in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in the Indus Valley, in scattered parts of Europe, in China, and in Peru. Suddenly, very suddenly, after tens of thousands of years when the roots of what we know as religion grew really slowly, gradually, there was a revolutionary period of change, a period of time lasting only about 600 years, from about the 8th to the 3rd century BCE. This time period, known as the Axial Age, is when the most influential world traditions came into being, the very same traditions that continue to this day. These dramatic outbursts of religious, intellectual, and philosophical sophistication happened in 4 places. In China, where Confucianism and Taoism were founded. In India, where Hinduism and Buddhism were established. In Greece, where philosophical rationalism developed alongside the Greek polytheistic form of worship. And most importantly for our discussion, in Israel, where monotheism had its start. This monotheistic religion became known as Judaism, which in turn led to the birth of the 2 other Western monotheistic religions, Christianity and Islam. Up until the Axial Age, all people prayed to multiple gods, what is called polytheism. These gods were represented as idols commonly made of stone or wood. They were generally small, portable, and therefore personal. Here in this clip, Roman gladiator Maximus, played by Russell Crowe in the film Gladiator, prays to his ancestors, represented by the personal idols he carries with him.
Ancestors, I ask your guidance. Blessed Mother, come to me with the God's desire for my future. Blessed Father, watch over my wife and son with a ready sword.
Judaism dramatically parted from polytheism and specifically forbid the worship of idols. In Judaism then and now, God is singular. This is boldly declared in the 10 Commandments. I am the Lord thy God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image, nor any manner of likeness of anything that is in heaven above, that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. This insistence that God has no physical form, that God is everywhere, but not visible, not reproducible in wood or stone, put Judaism at odds with all other religions of the time. The Jewish kingdom flourished, but was attacked by the Greeks, who tried and failed to force them to worship their many gods. The Jewish holiday Hanukkah commemorates the Jewish victory over the Greeks. Next come the Romans, also polytheists and led by an emperor who himself was considered a god. The Romans set out to vanquish the monotheistic Jews who wanted no part of Rome and its gods. Eventually, however, the Romans destroyed the Jewish temple, destroyed the Jewish state, and forced almost all of the Jews to leave Israel, and they scattered around the world. It was at that time that followers of a Jewish teacher murdered by the Romans created a new religion, Christianity. Early Christians believed that the Jewish teacher, whose name was Yeshua, Hebrew for Joshua, was the Son of God and himself a sacred being. Followers of Jesus Christ created the religion we know as Christianity, of course. Also, a monotheistic religion, though Christians believe in a Trinitarian God, that is a three-part God made up of three equal persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Within a brief period of time, about 400 years, Christianity became so popular that the Roman Emperor Theodosius I made it the official religion of the Roman Empire. Many values and laws established in Judaism were appropriated by Christianity and Islam. A good example is the Jewish instruction to, quote, love your neighbor as yourself. This appears in the portion of the Torah called Leviticus and is also found in the Christian Bible. It's repeated word for word in the New Testament in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. In the Quran, doing good towards neighbors is also mentioned. It reads, do good to parents, kinfolk, orphans, those in need, neighbors who are near, neighbors who are strangers. Another key commandment in Judaism is what's called in Hebrew tikkun olam. This translates to heal the world. Jews are obligated to help others and help protect the earth. Observant Jews follow dietary laws that forbid pork and stipulates that meat and dairy foods not be consumed in the same meal, and some other restrictions. Similarly, Muslims also forbid pork and must eat only meat slaughtered in a prescribed manner. All three religions are based upon stories. Stories passed down orally from generation to generation of Abraham and Sarah, of Isaac and Rebekah, and more. These stories are intended to provide instruction on how to live one's life, on a life based upon human interaction with God. Christians built their faith upon this foundation in Judaism, but gave it this extraordinarily new identity by declaring that Christ was the Son of God. In what Christians call the New Testament, one finds stories of Christ, of the Virgin Mary, and the apostles. These become the heart of Christianity. As in Judaism, these stories are meant to be understood as instructions on how to live a good life, a life in keeping with a code of ethics. Later, with Islam, the story of the Prophet Muhammad becomes the heart of the Islamic faith. The sacred text of Judaism is the Torah. This includes what are often called the 5 books of Moses and other writings that include the words of key Jewish prophets, such as Isaiah. The Christian Bible, codified gradually in the 2nd century after the time when Christ lived. The Christian Bible contains 2 sections. The largest portion, and the one that comes first in a Christian Bible, is what Christians call the Old Testament. It contains translations of the 5 books of Moses and some other portions of the Jewish Torah. The New Testament is a chronicle of the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. This is the heart of Christianity. The story is told from the perspective of different disciples of Christ. The major values of Christianity are much the same as in Judaism because Christ's teachings are inherently Jewish. For that reason, one reads word for word in the New Testament the same words Jews had always read. Love your neighbor as yourself. What's radically different is that Christians believe that Jesus Christ died so that all Christians can achieve a state of grace and forgiveness of their sins. Whereas in Judaism, forgiveness for sins comes in 2 ways: through prayer to God and asking the people you've wronged or sinned against, to forgive you. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have some things very much in common. However, the ways the 3 faiths worship diverge considerably. Judaism and Islam discourage or forbid any image that purports to represent God. whereas in many Christian sects, visual representations of Christ, Mary, and other sacred figures are permitted, in fact, celebrated. This has often been a divisive issue within Christianity itself. But as the Catholic Church grew more powerful and wealthier, it discovered how incredibly effective art could be in encouraging people to become Christians and in teaching Christians how to properly revere sacred persons. The history of Western art for the past 2,000 years is greatly enriched by the extraordinary works of art commissioned by the Church by iconic artists such as Michelangelo and Raphael. Whereas in Judaism and Islam, not only were images of God forbidden, but images of people who the Torah tells us were made in the image of God were forbidden or discouraged. In an important area, it's Christianity and Islam that are alike. In this sense, life after death is central to the entire arc of Christian faith and fundamental for observant Muslims. Whereas in Judaism, it's virtually absent. Jews believe that God wants the focus of their lives to be on mankind and not on a life after death. Nevertheless, in general, the values that Judaism established and which Christianity built upon have influenced to a vast extent the nature of Western societies, of ethics and laws. Islam, the third Western monotheistic faith, came into being about 600 years after the time of Christ and about 1,500 years after Judaism began. Islam begins with a life of its prophet Muhammad, born in the Arabian city of Mecca in about the year 570 CE. At this time, people in that part of the world were still polytheists. Muhammad gathered a small group of followers together with whom he shared what Muslims came to consider divine revelations about the singularity of God, who they called Allah. Then and now, however, Muslims believe that Islam didn't begin with Muhammad, but rather with the teachings of Jewish prophets and those of Christ. The Quran, the holy text of Islam, consists of a combination of the revelations and teachings of Muhammad, written down by his followers about the nature of Allah, in addition to retellings of key narratives in the Torah, the Jewish Bible, and narratives from the New Testament about Jesus and Mary. Interestingly, Moses is mentioned more so even than Muhammad in the Quran, and Jesus is also mentioned more often in the Quran than Muhammad, while Mary is mentioned more often in the Quran than she is in the New Testament. Muhammad's teachings emphasize that all people are equal, regardless of their social or economic standing and regardless of their race or ancestry. For that reason, Islam spread rapidly. Its egalitarian approach appealed to people. It also spread because, stretching back to Muhammad's lifetime, the religion of Islam was closely tied to political states. Muhammad's disciples created the very first Islamic state soon after Muhammad's death. Faith and religious practice of like-minded people creates community. At the same time, religious faith intensified to the point where an individual or a group believes that only their beliefs are somehow right. This is where religion alienates people and is too often the root of violence. In the U.S. in recent years, there's been increasing division between people who want to see religious values and laws be part of our secular society. God, religion, faith, and their rightful place in American public life has become an increasingly heated, controversial topic. It might be useful to keep in mind that "In God We Trust," the official motto of the United States, was introduced only in 1956, only 60-odd years ago. At that time, communism, which was often referred to as godless communism, was, some people thought, a present danger to American society. These people wanted to see God and Christian faith enshrined in our day-to-day lives. Prior to the motto, "In God We Trust," the phrase "E pluribus unum," or "from many, one," was the unofficial U.S. motto, and one that dates back to 1782. I picked this location to film a module about faith because, of course, of the beautiful interior in this church, This is an interior, and and we can say this of the exterior as well, that is appropriated from the great European Gothic cathedrals. For that reason, this style in the United States is known as neo-Gothic, the kind of the new Gothic look. When our cities began to be developed in this country, there was a sense that Americans had left behind the true culture, their European culture. So they made an effort for a very long time to build in ways that would be reminiscent of and remind them of their European roots. That kind of questing for one's beginnings. And something that I relate to having to do with my own faith and with my own family. So my 5 times great-grandfather was a man named Abraham Shlomo Zalman Hatzorath. He was born in 1786 in a very small town in Lithuania. As a young man, he was studying Torah, studying the Jewish texts, and he learned that there was a small synagogue that had been built about 1,700 years earlier in the old city of Jerusalem that had been torn down because it was part of the Ottoman territory at the time. And he got it in his head that it was his mission. In a sense, he believed that God wanted him to return to Jerusalem, where the Romans had kicked us out of all those centuries before, and rebuild this synagogue. And he walks with his wife, 2 kids, a horse, and a cart, all the way to Constantinople. Sometime later, he gets a ship and goes to Israel, again, part of the Ottoman Empire at that time, and makes his way to Jerusalem in the year 1811, and sets out to build a consensus and raise money to reconstruct a very small synagogue known already by the name the Churva, which means the ruin because it had been torn down by the Turks. And incredibly, he succeeds. He succeeds in the doing of so. He has to journey overland to Egypt and get a building permit. He has to go back to Europe to raise money with the Rothschild family in France. But he succeeds. And by the end of the 1850s, this synagogue stands once again, and people go there to pray. Interestingly, this 5 times great-grandfather of mine is then killed by an Arab, which isn't really all that surprising because that's how long there's been strife between these two people, between Jews and Muslims, Jews and Arabs. That's the conundrum. That's the hard thing about religion. I do believe that religion potentially gives one a great sense of belonging, community, reverence for life, but it can divide us and cause endless troubles, as we still see in that part of the world and in our own society. I encourage you to learn more about religion, and even more important than that, perhaps, take every opportunity you can to experience other people's religious practice. I really love it when I'm invited to someone's church or to a different synagogue or to a mosque. These are unique opportunities. Usually people are very welcoming to an outsider. And you'll begin to sense and observe the ways in which you may be similar and different than others. One thing is clear: we have to learn better how to coexist.